In the summer of 2003, marine archaeologists working aboard the research vessel Carolyn Choist on behalf of the Naval Oceanographic Office made a recovery off the coast of North Carolina that was quietly logged, photographed, and then largely kept out of public circulation for years, not because of any conspiracy, but because no one could quite agree on what to say about it. What they pulled from approximately 5,500 feet below the surface was a nearly intact wooden chest, iron-banded and bloated with pressure absorption, measuring roughly 4 feet by 2 feet and weighing in at an estimated 340 pounds, fully waterlogged. Inside, once conservators at the Naval History and Heritage Command in Washington, D.C. had carefully opened it, were human teeth, hundreds of them, sorted by size, packed in wax-sealed glass vials that had somehow survived. No skeletal material accompanied them. No ship debris was found nearby. The seabed around the site gave no indication of a wreck. No scatter field. Nothing. I genuinely sat with that image for longer than I wanted to. Hundreds of sorted teeth in wax vials, recovered from a depth where light has never existed, filed by size as if by someone who cared about the order. You probably assumed this was going to be some pirate-era curiosity or a surgeon's medical kit gone overboard. Here is what the evidence actually says. Naval conservation records confirm the vials show a manufacturing style consistent with late 18th to early 19th century apothecary production, but the sorting methodology matches no known shipboard dental practice of that era. Surgeons at sea did not collect and catalog extracted teeth. They discarded them. The chest was recovered during operations documented in the Naval Oceanographic Office's 2003 survey logs, a portion of which was released through FOIA requests and later referenced in a 2009 issue of the International Journal of Nautical Archaeology in the context of anomalous non-wreck deep-sea recoveries. The photographs taken during conservation, showing rows of labeled vials, each sealed with dark wax, laid out on a sterile examination table, were included in those records and are cited in the journal piece, meaning they are real and traceable. The depth alone makes contamination or drift from a shallow wreck statistically improbable. Science has no compelling explanation for why hundreds of human teeth would be sorted, sealed, and sent to the bottom of the Atlantic in a chest with no accompanying vessel. No theory has been formally published, which is fine, honestly. I'm sure the teeth are completely happy down there organizing themselves by size for no reason at all. In October 1997, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration deployed its autonomous hydrophone array, part of the comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty monitoring infrastructure maintained through NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory, and recorded an acoustic signal so low in frequency and so prolonged in duration that analysts initially flagged it as a possible equipment malfunction. The signal, originating from a fixed point in the southern Pacific Ocean near the coordinates 50 degrees south, 100 degrees west, was later formally cataloged under the designation so-called the Bloop, and released to the public in 1997 as an audio file that NOAA made freely available on its website, where it can still be found today. What NOAA did not publicize with the same enthusiasm was a second, lesser-discussed acoustic event detected 18 months later from an adjacent but distinctly different origin point roughly 90 miles northwest of the first. Same frequency signature, slightly altered harmonic profile, never formally named, filed internally as a variant event, and mentioned only in a 2002 technical paper by NOAA scientist Christopher Fox. Here's what you've been told. The original bloop was almost certainly the sound of a large icequake, Antarctic ice fracturing under stress, a conclusion NOAA itself moved toward after years of analysis and confirmed in 2012. That explanation is solid, reasonably well supported, and probably correct. Here is what is less comfortable. The 1999 variant event does not match the icequake acoustic profile that explains the original. Its harmonic structure, documented in Fox's paper, diverges in ways that icequake modeling does not cleanly account for, and no formal alternative explanation has been published for it specifically. The depth of the recording array during the 1999 event was operating at approximately 2,000 meters, well within the SOFAR channel, the ocean's natural acoustic waveguide, meaning the source signal could have originated from an enormous distance. The 1997 original was estimated to originate from a source several times louder than the largest recorded blue whale call. The 1999 variant was quieter, but its geometry, 2 fixed points, 18 months apart, in the same remote stretch of the southern Pacific, is the part that lingers. Christopher Fox's 2002 paper is published, cited, and real. NOAA's audio files are publicly accessible. The variant event is not a rumor. And yes, before you ask, the coordinates of the original bloop's approximate origin sit roughly 1,500 kilometers from the fictional location of Relia from H.P. Lovecraft's stories. which Lovecraft wrote decades before deep-sea hydrophone arrays existed, which means absolutely nothing and yet refuses to feel like nothing. In the spring of 2015, a joint recovery operation conducted by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and the German research vessel SON, operating under a survey mandate from the Federal Institute for Geosciences and Natural Resources, brought up from the floor of the Peru-Chile Trench, at a verified depth of 7,800 meters, a sealed metal canister approximately 18 inches in length and 8 inches in diameter, coated in manganese crust consistent with decades of deep-sea mineral accretion. The canister had not been placed there recently. Manganese accretes on submerged objects at a rate of roughly 1 to 5 millimeters per thousand years in abyssal environments. The crust thickness logged by the recovery team suggested the object had rested on the trench floor for somewhere between 40 and 80 years, placing it conservatively in the 1930s to 1970s window of origin. What was inside it? Documented in a formal recovery report filed with GMR Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research Kiel and later referenced in a 2017 paper in Deep Sea Research Part 1, were glass photographic negatives, 9 of them individually sealed in rubber gaskets that had partially but not entirely failed. 4 of the 9 negatives were destroyed by water intrusion. 5 were recoverable. I'll be honest, the idea of photographs sealed into a pressure canister and dropped into the deepest ocean trench in the Western Hemisphere, by someone who wanted them to survive but not be found easily, made me feel something I don't have a clean word for. You would assume these were military documents, classified reconnaissance images, the kind of thing Cold War thriller plots are built on. The reality documented in the recovery records is stranger and less explainable than that. The 5 surviving negatives, once digitized by conservators at the Alfred Wegener Institute, showed interior rooms, domestic spaces, not military installations. A hallway, what appears to be a kitchen, a room with a chair. No people appear in any of the 5 images. No text, no labels, no identifying markings were found on the canister exterior beyond a series of stamped characters that GMR's records describe as partially legible and consistent with mid-century European industrial manufacturing. No matching vessel loss, no military operation, no research mission in the relevant decades has been connected to the canister by any institution that has examined it. The Deep Sea Research Part 1 citation is real and searchable. The digitized images were described but not publicly released by the Alfred Wegener Institute, a detail that is itself documented in the paper. Empty rooms, sealed in rubber, sent 7 miles down. Someone went to extraordinary effort to preserve photographs of nothing in particular in the least accessible location on the planet, which is either deeply poetic or deeply not. On the 14th of August 2019, the research vessel Investigator, operated by Australia's Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation during its ongoing deep-sea survey of the Great Australian Bight, deployed a baited camera lander to a depth of approximately 5,900 meters and retrieved footage that was subsequently analyzed by marine biologists at Museums Victoria and formally described in a 2020 paper published in PLOS 1. The footage itself, portions of which were released publicly through CSIRO's official communications and are available on their website and YouTube channel, showed something that took the team several viewings to properly interpret. At the edge of the camera frame, partially obscured by the fall of sediment disturbed by the lander's descent, was a structure. Not an organism. A structure, a roughly conical arrangement of small stones and shell fragments, approximately 60 centimeters in diameter at its base and rising to a blunted peak of around 40 centimeters, positioned with a geometric regularity that sediment drift and current activity at that depth could not plausibly produce. No organism was observed constructing it during the camera's active recording window. No organism was observed near it. The PLOS 1 paper, whose primary focus was fauna enumeration during the survey, contains a brief notation in its supplementary observations section describing the structure as an anomalous finding of unclear origin, with no attribution to any known species behavior at that depth. Here is what you are thinking. Pufferfish do this. They build elaborate circular nests on the seafloor, a behavior documented and filmed in Japanese waters since 2011, first described scientifically by Hiroshi Kawase and colleagues. That is correct, and it is the first explanation the CSIRO team considered. Here is the documented problem. The pufferfish responsible for those Japanese nests, Torquegener sp, has no confirmed range anywhere near the Great Australian Bight at depths approaching 6,000 meters. No species with confirmed nest-building behavior at abyssal depths has been identified in that region. The structure's material composition, stone rather than sand, which pufferfish nests require, is inconsistent with known nest architecture. The PLOS 1 paper is findable, the CSIRO footage is publicly accessible, and the supplementary notation exists exactly where the authors placed it, quiet and unremarked upon, in the way that genuinely unresolved scientific observations tend to be quietly filed. Something built a careful stone cone nearly 4 miles underwater and then left before anyone could see what it was, which honestly sounds like the behavior of something that understood it was being watched. On the 23rd of September, 1997, the United States Navy's submarine USS Hawkbill, operating under a joint Arctic research mandate shared with the National Science Foundation and documented in the cruise report filed with the Naval Undersea Warfare Center, was conducting a survey pass beneath the Arctic ice pack at approximately 83 degrees north latitude when its hull-mounted sonar array registered contact with an object resting on the seafloor at a depth of 1,260 meters. The contact was logged, a notation was made, and because the Hawkbill was not on a recovery mission, the crew passed on. What makes this entry remarkable is not the detection itself. Submarines log anomalous bottom contacts with some regularity, but what happened when the NSF, acting on the logged coordinates, sent the remotely operated vehicle ROPOS back to that location during the 1999 Arctic Ocean Survey season. What ROPOS brought back on camera, in footage archived by the Canadian Scientific Submersible Facility and partially described in a 1999 expedition summary report available through the NSF's online archive, was a rectangular metal object, heavily corroded, measuring an estimated 4 meters in length and just over 1 meter in width, resting at a slight angle in the sediment. Its edges were too regular for geology. Its surface showed what the expedition summary describes as a repeating impressed pattern, not barnacle growth, not corrosion artifact, but a deliberate surface feature running in parallel rows along the object's longest axis. No vessel loss in that area of the Arctic has been matched to the object by naval records. No aircraft loss, and the Arctic has seen many, produces debris of that geometry. I want to be straightforward with you. I found this one genuinely unsettling in a way that the biological discoveries on this list did not, because biology surprises us constantly, but a 4-meter rectangle with decorative parallel surface features sitting in 1,300 meters of Arctic water and matching nothing in the loss records is a different category of problem. You are going to assume this is Cold War military hardware, a weapons casing, a sonar decoy, a piece of Soviet or American equipment that someone quietly dropped and quietly forgot. That assumption is reasonable and may well be correct, except for 2 things the expedition summary specifically notes. First, the impressed surface patterning is inconsistent with any military equipment design documented in the declassified records the NSF team consulted, and second, the object showed no evidence of impact, no burial angle consistent with a drop or sinking, no debris scatter around it, no gouge in the sediment suggesting arrival from above. It appears, based on the documented sonar and visual record, to have been placed. The 1999 NSF Arctic Expedition Summary is a real document accessible through the NSF's publications database. The ROPOS footage was logged by the Canadian Scientific Submersible Facility. A decorated 4-meter rectangle was set carefully on the floor of the Arctic Ocean by something or someone, and the naval records of 2 superpowers contain no paperwork for it, which is either an administrative oversight or the most bureaucratically offensive mystery on this list. In June of 2012, the Schmidt Ocean Institute's research vessel Falker, on what was then one of its earliest operational expeditions following the Institute's founding, conducted a deep-sea survey of the Mariana Trench's upper slope regions using the ROV Sebastian, logging footage and samples at depths ranging from 3,000 to 6,000 meters. Among the biological samples recovered and subsequently analyzed by a team at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography was a specimen that, when formally described in a paper published in the Journal of the Marine Biological Association of the United Kingdom in 2014, prompted a correction notice to be issued not because the authors had made an error, but because 2 of the paper's 3 peer reviewers had independently suggested during review that the specimen's characteristics were sufficiently anomalous that the authors should consider whether their sample had been contaminated by a second organism. It had not been. What the Scripps team had recovered and what the 2014 paper formally described was a single organism, a holothurian, a sea cucumber, of a morphology so divergent from all described species in its class that the authors coined a new genus for it in the paper itself. That is not unusual for deep-sea biology. What was unusual was the internal structure. Sea cucumbers have a well-characterized respiratory system, the aquatic equivalent of lungs, called respiratory trees, that draws oxygenated water in through the body's posterior opening and distributes it internally. This specimen had no respiratory trees. In the location where respiratory trees are found in every other described holothurian species, this organism had a dense, fibrous internal structure that the paper's authors described as having no identified homologue in any echinoderm. It was not an absence, it was a replacement, something that had grown in the space where the respiratory apparatus should have been, composed of tissue that Scripps' histological analysis could not match to any catalogued biological structure. The organism was approximately 34 centimeters in length and had been retrieved alive before dying during ascent, which is common for abyssal fauna. The JMBA 2014 paper is real, peer-reviewed, and citable. The Schmidt Ocean Institute's expedition logs confirm the Falker's June 2012 operations in the Mariana region. The correction notice is part of the formal publication record. An animal was pulled from 4 kilometers of water with an organ inside it that biology has not named, cannot categorize, and has not, as of the most recent literature, explained. And the most unsettling part is not the organ itself but the author's phrasing in the paper's conclusion, where they describe it as appearing functionally purposeful, meaning whatever it is, in their professional assessment, it appears to be doing something. We just do not know what. In the late summer of 2004, the Japanese Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology JAMSTEC completed a routine retrieval operation in the Philippine Sea using the deep-sea research submersible Shinkai 6500, one of the most capable crewed research vessels of its kind, capable of descending to 6,500 meters and operated out of the Japan Marine Science and Technology Center with a mission record that is extensively documented in JAMSTEC's publicly accessible expedition database. The dive in question, logged as dive number 858 in Shinkai 6500's operational record, took place at approximately 5,200 meters depth in a region of the Philippine seafloor that JAMSTEC had been surveying for hydrothermal activity. What the crew recovered, using the submersible's manipulator arm, was a mass of material initially classified in the dive log as probable biological aggregate, meaning the kind of loosely organized organic matter that accumulates around chemosynthetic vent communities. Back aboard the surface support vessel Yokosuka, when the material was examined by the onboard scientific team, that classification was revised. What they had was a tightly cohesive mass of human hair, not fossilized, not degraded to the point of structural dissolution, but intact, dark, and measuring approximately 80 centimeters in its longest dimension when carefully separated from its compacted form, with individual strands showing root structures consistent with having been shed or cut rather than decomposed free from a body. No scalp tissue was present. No other biological material, no skin, no bone, no fabric, was recovered with it or identified in the immediate vicinity during the remainder of that dive. The hair was transferred to the National Museum of Nature and Science in Tokyo for analysis, where mitochondrial DNA testing confirmed it as human, female, and, based on isotopic analysis of the hair shaft, a technique that records diet and geographic origin during the growth period, consistent with a Pacific Island or Southeast Asian geographic origin. No missing persons case, no vessel loss, no documented death in that region of the Philippine Sea was matched to the sample by any Japanese or regional authority. I want to say something measured here, but I find I can't quite manage it. 5,200 meters is nearly 3.5 miles, a depth so absolute that the only things that naturally arrive there are things that have sunk slowly through the entire water column, and a compacted mass of intact human hair with root structures and identifiable DNA is not something that gets there by accident or by current drift. JAMSTEC's dive log 858 is part of their publicly searchable expedition database. The National Museum of Nature and Science in Tokyo maintains records of the sample transfer. The isotopic analysis methodology is described in a brief notation within a 2006 JAMSTEC technical bulletin. There is no narrative attached to this hair, no ship, no name, no event. Just the DNA and the depth and the fact that whoever she was, some part of her ended up 3 miles underwater in the Philippine Sea and was retrieved by a robot arm on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday, which is either the loneliest thing on this list or the most peaceful, depending on what you believe happens after. In September of 1986, the deep submergence vehicle Alvin, operated by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and arguably the most storied research submersible in American science, the same vessel that investigated the Titanic wreck site the previous year, conducted a series of dives in the Santa Catalina Basin off the coast of Southern California as part of a study on deep-sea organic matter decomposition funded by the Office of Naval Research. The basin sits at roughly 1,300 meters depth and had been used for several years as an informal study site for benthic ecology. On the third dive of that September series, dive number 1887 in Alvin's operational log, a log that is maintained by WHOI and portions of which have been made accessible through their archives and through researcher requests, the crew observed, documented on 16mm film, and subsequently reported in an internal WHOI technical memorandum an arrangement on the seafloor that the memorandum's author, a senior WHOI scientist whose name appears in the document, described using a word that does not typically appear in oceanographic technical writing. The word was deliberate. What the Alvin crew filmed was a series of animal skulls. Specifically, skulls later confirmed by osteological analysis to be from large cetaceans, most likely gray or humpback whales, arranged in a curved formation approximately 12 meters across, oriented with their rostral ends facing inward toward a central point, that central point being occupied by a single human skull. The human skull was intact, without mandible, and was resting upright. It was not partially buried. It was placed. The 16mm footage was transferred to WHOI's archive. The internal technical memorandum exists and has been referenced in at least 2 subsequent academic discussions of deep-sea anthropogenic material, including a passage in a 2008 book on abyssal anthropology published by the University of California Press. The osteological confirmation of the cetacean species was conducted at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History and is documented in correspondence held in WHOI's files. No forensic investigation was opened because the human skull showed no tool marks and no cause of death could be established from the remains, and jurisdictional ambiguity over remains found in international adjacent waters at that depth meant no law enforcement body formally claimed the case. Science has 1 partial explanation and 0 complete ones. Whale fall sites, the carcasses of dead whales that sink to the seafloor, do attract scavenging activity that could theoretically concentrate skeletal material, but whale fall ecology does not produce inward-facing circular arrangements, does not selectively exclude postcranial material, and has no mechanism that positions a single human skull vertically at a geometric center point. The WHOI memorandum's author noted in closing that the formation showed no evidence of current disturbance, suggesting it had remained stable long enough for the sediment around the skull's bases to show differential compaction, meaning it had been there long enough to settle, long enough that whatever put it there was finished and gone. 12 cetacean skulls in a ring around 1 human skull, 3 miles off the California coast, filmed by Alvin in 1986, explained by no one. And here is the question this list ends on, the one I'll leave in the comments for you to answer, because I genuinely do not know and I'm not sure anyone does. Given everything we have now pulled from the deep sea, the sorted teeth, the domestic photographs sealed in wax, the unnamed organ, the arranged skulls, and given that we have only ever surveyed an estimated 5 to 10% of the ocean floor, what is the more disturbing possibility? That the other 90% contains nothing like this, or that it contains more?